Hello, ladies, you don't always realize the quiet power you hold. You don't need to shout, you don't need to fight, you don't even need to argue. Sometimes your silence alone can shake the ground beneath a man. Sometimes the way you withdraw your warmth, the way you hold back your gaze, the way you choose not to respond, that alone is enough to break his pride, to bend his arrogance, to shatter the ego he thought was unshakable. You are the storm he never sees coming, not with noise, but with silence. There is a kind of power that requires no shouting, no confrontation, and no battlefield. It is the power of coldness, the quiet refusal to give energy, attention, or validation. And when it is directed at a man who lives by his ego, it becomes the sharpest sword, cutting deeper than anger ever could. An ego is fragile. It looks strong on the outside, but inside it is made of glass. It feeds on attention, whether that attention comes in the form of love, admiration, or even argument. But when that flow of energy is suddenly withdrawn, when the warmth that once fed his pride turns to coldness, the ego begins to crack. Anger he can fight, arguments he can defend, but coldness is a battlefield where no fight is possible. He cannot strike against silence, nor can he heal his pride with indifference staring back at him. Your coldness becomes the mirror he cannot escape. It forces him to look inward, to question himself, to confront the truth he has long ignored. And that truth is brutal. Without your warmth, his ego starves. Distance becomes heavier than words. Indifference becomes sharper than rejection. He realizes that no matter how powerful he believed himself to be, it was your energy that gave his pride life. Now, stripped of that energy, he feels powerless. This is the ultimate shift of power. Without raising your voice, without lowering yourself into conflict, you claim victory. Your silence becomes louder than his shout. Your coldness becomes stronger than his arrogance. There is a power in coldness that cannot be measured by words, a force that does not need to scream to be heard, a presence that does not chase yet dominates the room without ever lifting a finger. Coldness is not emptiness, it is not weakness, it is not the absence of feeling, it is the deliberate withholding of warmth, the quiet withdrawal of energy that once gave life. The invisible curtain drawn between two souls, leaving one to wonder, to ache, to question why the warmth is gone, why the eyes no longer glow, why the air that once carried comfort now feels heavy with distance. Coldness speaks in silence, and silence is a language the ego cannot translate. It lingers in the air, it drips into the cracks of his mind, it whispers louder than accusations. It unsettles more than any argument ever could. For anger is loud, anger is fiery, anger burns quick and fades, but coldness freezes, it lingers, it suffocates. It stretches time itself until seconds feel like hours, hours like days, days like endless punishment without chains, without walls, without blows. And yet the prison is unescapable because the walls exist inside his own mind. The silent power of coldness is not in what it shows, but in what it denies. It denies the ego the validation it craves, the recognition it demands, the stage it longs to perform upon. Coldness folds its arms, turns its gaze elsewhere, closes its ears, and suddenly the man who once thought himself strong finds himself performing in an empty theater, speaking into a void, shouting into an abyss that never replies, never reacts, never breaks. And the more he shouts, the more his voice fades, the more desperate he becomes, the more he realizes that silence is not weakness. It is dominance in its purest form, because coldness is a mirror. It reflects back everything he has done, everything he has failed to see, everything he thought could be hidden behind pride. And the reflection does not flatter him, does not feed him, does not forgive him. It simply stares back with a blankness that strips him bare, that reminds him he is not invincible, that his ego is nothing more than paper in the rain, crumbling slowly, painfully, without fire, without storm, only with silence, only with coldness, only with that quiet, endless refusal to engage. And the beauty of this power is that it does not end. It carries on in the silence of every unanswered word, in the distance of every step unreturned, in the stillness of every gaze turned away, in the weight of every pause that stretches without mercy, in the invisible walls that grow higher and higher each time warmth is withheld, in the endless echo of his own thoughts chasing themselves in circles, in the sleepless nights where he begs for noise just to drown the silence, in the countless mornings where he wakes to emptiness colder than ice, in the realization that coldness is not the absence of power but the purest form of it, a power that does not need to declare itself, a power that does not bow, a power that does not chase, a power that simply is, existing like an endless winter, stretching and stretching and still stretching. Ego presents itself as armor, as something strong, as something unbreakable, yet beneath the surface, it is thinner than glass, weaker than paper, lighter than smoke, and still it parades itself as steel, pretending to be indestructible, pretending to be eternal, pretending to be untouchable, but every pretense hides a trembling core, every display of pride covers a fear of exposure, every loud declaration masks a silent insecurity that waits, trembling in the shadows. Ego builds walls, but the walls are hollow. It builds shields, but the shields are cracked. It builds crowns, but the crowns are plastic painted to look like gold. And still it marches forward as though it rules, as though it cannot be touched, as though nothing can pierce it, until coldness arrives. For coldness does not fight the shield, it does not attack the walls, it does not argue with the crown, it simply denies them. And what is a shield when there is nothing to defend against? What is a wall when no one knocks? What is a crown when no one bows? Ego crumbles not because it was defeated, but because it was ignored. And in that ignoring, it finds the sharpest wound of all. Ego lives off reflections. It must see itself in the eyes of others. It must hear itself in the praise of others. It must feel itself in the attention of others. And when those mirrors are removed, when those eyes look away, when the applause grows silent, the ego realizes it has no substance of its own, no weight, no foundation. It was never armor, it was always glass. And glass does not shatter with force alone. It shatters with silence, with distance, with the invisible cracks spreading slowly, quietly, until one day the entire structure falls apart with the lightest touch, the smallest breath, the gentlest withdrawal of warmth. And the fragility of ego is that it cannot admit its fragility. It must act unbothered, it must act untouchable, it must act as though the coldness does not sting, as though the silence does not cut, as though the indifference does not burn. But inside, the shield has already begun to splinter. Every unanswered message is a crack. Every turned glance is a fracture. Every moment of silence is a blow heavier than any weapon. And still he pretends, still he hides, still he clings to the illusion that the shield holds strong, when in truth it is already falling apart in his hands, slipping through his fingers like broken glass, cutting him as it breaks, leaving him bleeding with wounds no one can see. The fragile shield of ego cannot survive reality. It only survives performance, and when the audience leaves, when the stage goes dark, when the light no longer shines upon him, he is left alone with nothing but the shards of his own pride scattered around his feet. Shards he cannot pick up, shards he cannot mend, shards that reflect back the truth he does not want to see. That his armor was never real, his strength was never solid, his shield was never indestructible. It was only fragile, only brittle, only delicate, waiting for the coldness that would not strike but simply stand, simply exist, simply refuse. And in that refusal the ego collapses, endlessly collapsing, forever collapsing, breaking again and again each time silence stretches, each time coldness deepens each time indifference grows colder, until the shield is nothing, until the illusion is nothing, until the pride is nothing, and still it keeps breaking, still it keeps falling, still it keeps splintering without end. Anger is loud, it is fire, it is heat rushing through veins, it is words thrown like weapons, it is storms that come fast and burn out just as quickly, leaving behind smoke and ashes. But even in its destruction there is clarity, there is noise, there is proof that something still exists between two souls, because anger means you still matter, anger means you still occupy space in his heart, anger means he still feels your presence, even if it is twisted into rage. But coldness is something else entirely. It is not fire, it is not noise, it is not storm. It is the absence of all those things. It is silence so heavy it presses on his chest. It is distance so vast it stretches into infinity. It is an emptiness that cannot be argued with, cannot be shouted against, cannot be broken through, because there is nothing to break, nothing to argue, nothing to reach. When anger comes, he knows where to aim, he knows what to fight, he knows what to defend. But when coldness arrives, he finds himself shadow boxing in the dark, striking at emptiness, defending against silence, shouting into voids that never echo back. And the pain of coldness is not immediate like anger's fire. It is slow, it is creeping, it is endless. Anger burns you and is gone. Coldness freezes you and never leaves. It lingers in every unanswered call, every hollow stare, every moment where warmth should have been but is not. Coldness is the greater cruelty because it denies him even the dignity of combat. Anger is a battle. He can fight, he can argue, he can defend his ego. But coldness is exile. It is banishment without farewell. It is standing on the stage of his pride and realizing the audience has left. The lights are off, the curtains are drawn, and no one is watching anymore. And that realization eats at him, not in fire, but in frost, not in explosion, but in erosion. And the reason coldness hurts more than anger is because anger still gives him importance. Anger says, you matter enough to upset me, you matter enough to ignite my fury. But coldness says nothing. Coldness whispers, you do not matter at all. And that is the wound ego cannot heal, because it is not about being hated, it is about being erased. Anger is temporary. He knows it will end, he knows the fire will cool, he knows the shouting will stop. But coldness has no timeline. Coldness stretches on, it extends, it expands. It multiplies in silence after silence, in gaze after gaze, in distance after distance, until it feels eternal. And there is nothing he can do to stop it, nothing he can say to fight it, nothing he can build to shield himself from it, because coldness is not an attack, it is not a weapon. It is simply the absence of presence, and the absence grows heavier with every passing second. So, which hurts more, anger cuts deep, but coldness carves forever. Anger may burn, but coldness freezes without end. Anger may destroy the moment, but coldness destroys the soul. Anger leaves scars, but coldness leaves silence, and silence is the heaviest wound of all, stretching and stretching, widening and widening, deepening and deepening, without conclusion, without ending, without mercy. Words are many, they come fast, they tumble out like rivers after rain, they carry emotion, they carry anger, they carry pleas, they carry explanations. But words can be bent, twisted, forgotten. They can be argued against, defended against, deflected with other words, drowned beneath louder voices. But silence cannot be argued with. Silence cannot be twisted. Silence cannot be bent. Silence cannot be erased. For silence is not an absence of communication. It is a communication stronger than language itself. It is the message that lingers even when no sound has been made. It is the weight that sits heavier than 1,000 shouted explanations. Silence does not need permission. It does not need translation. It does not need justification. It simply exists, and in its existence, it speaks everything words cannot. It speaks rejection without saying no. It speaks disappointment without saying I'm hurt. It speaks indifference without saying I don't care. It speaks finality without saying it's over, and the man who once thought he was strong enough to handle words finds himself weaker than ever in the face of silence, because there is nothing to grasp, nothing to fight, nothing to respond to, only a void that echoes back his own emptiness. Silence speaks louder because it forces the other voice to listen to itself. In words, he can argue, he can deny, he can interrupt, he can push back. But in silence he is left only with his own thoughts, his own guilt, his own insecurities playing on repeat, looping in his mind without mercy, feeding on themselves, growing louder and louder until he cannot escape them. Silence is the courtroom where he is both defendant and judge, the prison where the bars are invisible but unbreakable, the battlefield where no one strikes but he still bleeds, and silence does not fade the way words do. A word spoken is a word that passes into the air and disappears, but silence stretches, silence lingers, silence expands to fill the room, the heart, the memory, the night. It is not a moment, it is an atmosphere. He feels it in the pause that never ends, in the phone that never rings, in the message that never comes, in the gaze that looks through him instead of at him, in the quiet that grows so heavy it drowns every attempt to breathe. That is why silence speaks louder, because silence cannot be ignored. He can dismiss words as exaggerations, he can argue against them, he can convince himself they were spoken in anger, but silence leaves him no escape. Silence is not temporary. Silence is not emotional outburst. Silence is truth, cold and steady, standing like a mountain before him, unmoving, unshakable, undeniable. And the more he tries to break it, the louder it becomes, the more he shouts into it, the heavier it presses, the more he struggles against it, the more it reveals his weakness, the more it exposes his ego, the more it shows him that no matter what words he clings to, no matter what pride he hides behind, silence is stronger, silence is deeper, silence is endless, and it keeps speaking louder and louder without pause, without rest, without mercy, never ending, never softening, only stretching and stretching, filling every corner of his thoughts, every shadow of his heart, every silence. Louder than a scream, every silence a thunder without sound, every silence the loudest truth of all ego is not self, ego is not strength, ego is not truth. It is a parasite. It feeds on attention the way fire feeds on oxygen. It consumes every glance, every word, every sigh, every smile, every argument, every praise, every little drop of energy given. And without that constant flow, it begins to wither. It begins to starve. It begins to shrink back into nothingness. His ego survives because eyes are watching him, because ears are listening to him, because hearts are reacting to him, because time is being spent on him, and every second of attention is a meal, every ounce of focus is nourishment, every trace of acknowledgement is fuel. But the moment that attention is withdrawn, the moment he finds himself unseen, unheard, unfed, the parasite trembles, the fire dims, the shadow collapses into itself. Attention, whether love or anger, whether admiration or criticism, whether soft words or sharp ones, it does not matter. All of it is food for his ego. Argue with him and you feed him. Praise him and you feed him. Even hate him and you feed him, because hate is still attention, because hate still means he matters enough to occupy your energy, because hate still means his presence still burns in your chest. But when you withhold, when you go cold, when you deny him even the bitterness of anger, that is when the famine begins, that is when the cracks appear, that is when his ego, bloated from years of feeding, realizes for the first time that it cannot survive without the warmth of eyes, without the weight of words, without the currency of care. His ego thrives on attention because attention tells him he is alive. Without it, he feels invisible, and invisibility is death to pride. What is a king with no kingdom to bow before him? What is a performer with no audience to clap? What is a flame with no air to breathe? He may scream louder, he may demand more, he may act larger than life, but every gesture is only proof of his hunger. Every display is only evidence of his emptiness. Every attempt to provoke is only a desperate plea. See me, hear me, notice me, feed me. And the silence that answers back is more devastating than 1,000 insults, because it does not fight him, it does not recognize him, it does not acknowledge his existence at all. And still his ego waits, hoping, searching, wandering in the dark for just a spark of reaction, just a flicker of warmth, just a moment of recognition. But the more he waits, the more he withers, the more he realizes that without your energy, without your light, without your attention, his ego cannot grow, it cannot stand, it cannot even breathe. It begins to starve in silence, it begins to collapse inward, it begins to devour itself, turning desperate, turning fragile, turning frantic, but still being denied, still being ignored, still being frozen out. Because his ego only knows how to live when someone else gives it life, and when that gift is taken away, when that attention is locked away, when that warmth is gone, his pride becomes nothing but an empty shell rattling in the wind, hollow, fragile, desperate, breaking piece by piece, starving endlessly, craving endlessly, collapsing endlessly, because his ego thrives on attention, and now there is none. And still he waits, and still he hungers, and still he breaks, endlessly breaking, endlessly starving, endlessly fading without end. To ignore is not weakness, to ignore is not retreat. To ignore is not surrender, it is power, it is control, it is dominance in its quietest and most undeniable form, because ignoring is not about absence, it is about choice. It is about looking directly at someone who craves attention, who feeds on validation, who survives on reaction, and deciding, you will not have mine. And that decision is a strike harder than any slap, sharper than any insult, heavier than any confrontation, because anger acknowledges him, argument validates him, response tells him he still matters, but ignoring says, you are not worth the energy, you are not worth the time, you are not worth the air of a reply. Ignoring is not silence alone, it is silence armed with purpose. It is the turning of the head when he enters the room, the calm scroll of the screen when his name flashes, the steady gaze out the window when his words fall dead, the refusal to rise when he provokes, the refusal to answer when he demands, the refusal to care when he begs, and in that refusal lies the deepest dominance, because you are not battling him, you are not fighting him, you are not trying to prove him wrong. You are simply removing him from the stage, stripping him of the one thing he cannot survive without: acknowledgement. And ego does not know how to survive being ignored. It is used to sparks, to flames, to reactions, to a mirror reflecting it back. But ignoring is the breaking of the mirror. It is showing him nothing. It is handing him the weight of his own emptiness and walking away. It is watching him twist and flail, searching for proof that he still matters, that he still has influence, that he still exists in your world, but finding nothing, receiving nothing, facing nothing but cold indifference. Ignoring as dominance is not about cruelty, it is about power, because power does not always scream. Power does not always strike. Sometimes power sits quietly, calmly, unbothered, and in that calmness it makes the loudest statement of all: you no longer have control here. You no longer take my energy, you no longer hold weight in my world, and he cannot fight that. He cannot argue with it, he cannot break through it. The more he tries, the more desperate he appears, the more the dominance deepens, the more the balance of power shifts. Ignoring is victory without battle. It is a crown worn without noise. It is strength displayed without lifting a hand. It bends the ego not with force, but with nothingness. It makes him crumble not with attacks, but with absence. It defeats him not by proving he is wrong, but by refusing to prove anything at all. Because ignoring is the purest form of dominance. It is unshakable, unmovable, unreachable, and still it cuts deeper, still it breaks harder, still it dominates endlessly, endlessly, endlessly without endress. Restraint is often mistaken for weakness, for passivity, for silence born of fear, but in truth, restraint is the highest form of strength, because anyone can explode, anyone can shout, anyone can let their emotions spill into the air like broken glass, cutting everything around them. But it takes power, real, quiet, unshakable power, to hold back, to remain composed, to sit in silence. When provoked, to walk away when tempted, to choose calmness when chaos is begging for a reaction. Restraint is not the absence of strength. It is the control of it. It is the mastery of it. It is the discipline of saying, I could, but I won't. I can, but I choose not to. I am capable of destroying you with fire, but instead I will let my silence do the work. The hidden strength in restraint is that it leaves the other person powerless. When he pushes, when he provokes, when he tries to spark a fire, restraint is the refusal to burn. When he demands an answer, restraint is the refusal to give him one. When he throws chaos into the air, restraint is the refusal to breathe it in. And that refusal eats at him because his ego expects reaction, expects validation, expects proof that his words, his actions, his noise still matter. But restraint denies all of it. Restraint stands still, unbothered, untouchable, and the stillness becomes heavier than 1,000 storms. Restraint is a mirror of control, not over him, but over yourself. It says, I am not your puppet, I am not your echo, I am not your reflection. You will not dictate when I rise, when I fall, when I speak, when I break. It is the refusal to dance to the tune he plays, the refusal to hand him the keys to your emotions, the refusal to let his chaos decide your peace. That is the hidden strength, the ability to remain unmoved in a world that tries to shake you, the ability to remain silent when words would only feed him, the ability to remain distant when closeness would only empower him, the ability to remain calm when fury would only satisfy his pride. And the ego does not know how to handle restraint. Anger it can fight, please it can exploit, emotion it can feed upon, but restraint is untouchable, it is unbreakable, it is maddening. It is watching someone hold infinite fire within them, and yet refusing to burn. It is standing before a storm that never falls, waiting for lightning that never strikes, and the waiting becomes torture, the silence becomes unbearable, the calm becomes the loudest sound in the room. The hidden strength in restraint is that it cannot be rushed, cannot be forced, cannot be broken. It holds steady, it holds strong, it holds silent, and in that silence it declares a victory louder than any battle cry. For restraint is not weakness, it is mastery, it is dominance, it is strength disguised as stillness, and that strength does not end, it does not fade, it does not crumble, it stretches on, deeper and deeper, stronger and stronger, hidden yet undeniable, endless, endless, endlessly without end. Distance is not always measured in miles. It is not always the space between two bodies. Sometimes distance is in the silence between two words. Sometimes distance is in the glance that no longer lingers. Sometimes distance is in the pause before a reply that never comes. And that distance cut sharper than any blade, because distance does not strike once and end. It strikes every second. It strikes in the emptiness of every moment. It strikes in the hollowness of every silence. It strikes in the air that feels colder than ice, heavier than stone, sharper than steel. He can fight words, he can argue with noise, he can wrestle with presence, but distance is untouchable. He cannot grab it, he cannot fight it, he cannot reason with it. It is a weapon, that does not need to swing, it does not need to pierce, it does not need to shout. It simply exists, and its existence is unbearable. Because distance means separation, distance means loss of control. Distance means he no longer occupies the space he thought he owned. Distance means he no longer commands the attention he thought was his forever. Distance means he is outside, left staring at closed doors, left watching through invisible glass, left knocking with no answer, left begging with no reply. And the sharpness of distance is in its subtlety. It does not wound with blood, it does not bruise the skin, it cuts deeper. It slices the ego, it pierces the pride, it leaves wounds no one can see but he feels endlessly. Each step of distance is a cut. Each pause is another blade. Each refusal to close the gap is another strike. Until suddenly, he is covered in wounds that were never inflicted by hands, but by absence, by silence, by the quiet refusal to let him close again. Distance is the weapon that kills without touch. It makes him ache not because you struck him, but because you did not. It makes him bleed not because you hurt him, but because you withdrew. It makes him collapse not because you fought, but because you walked away. And that walking away echoes louder than 1,000 screams, heavier than 1,000 blows, deeper than 1,000 arguments. For distance is not weakness, distance is not escape. Distance is strategy, distance is dominance, distance is power sharpened into invisibility. A blade he cannot see but feels every moment, every breath, every heartbeat. The further the distance grows, the sharper it becomes. It starts as a step, then it becomes a gap, then it becomes a chasm, then it becomes an ocean he cannot swim across. No matter how hard he tries, no matter how loud he calls, no matter how far he reaches. And the more he tries, the sharper it cuts, because every attempt only reminds him of the space he cannot cross. Every gesture only reminds him of the barrier that holds strong. Every effort only reminds him that distance is not an accident, it is a choice. And there is no defense against it, no shield to block it, no wall to hide behind. Distance is the sharpest weapon because it does not strike once and leave it strikes endlessly. It strikes silently, it strikes invisibly, it strikes without pause, it strikes without end, and still it keeps cutting, still it keeps slicing, still it keeps wounding, stretching further and further. Sharper and sharper, endless, endless, endlessly without indigo is a creature that lives off echoes. It feeds on reflection. It thrives on recognition. It breathes through attention. But when those echoes fall silent, when those reflections disappear, when recognition fades, when attention is gone, the ego is left stranded in emptiness, and emptiness is the one place it cannot survive. Because emptiness is starvation, emptiness is suffocation, emptiness is exile without walls, punishment without chains, silence without end. Ego is loud, ego is proud, ego is hungry, but emptiness gives it nothing. No fuel, no food, no air. And in that nothingness, the ego begins to collapse under its own weight. In emptiness, there is no one to admire him, no one to challenge him, no one to validate him, no one to argue with him. There is no applause, no resistance, no response, just void, and the ego, which pretended to be unshakable, begins to tremble. Because ego cannot exist on its own. It only exists when someone else reflects it back. Without a mirror, it sees nothing. Without an audience, it is nothing. Without reaction, it crumbles. And in emptiness, there is no mirror, no audience, no reaction. Only the sound of its own hollowness echoing back, weaker and weaker each time. Ego starves in emptiness. It searches for scraps, it begs for sparks, it claws for fragments of validation, but none arrive. It waits for a fight to feed on, but the fight never comes. It waits for attention to warm it, but the warmth never returns. It waits for presence to sustain it, but the presence has walked away, and in that waiting the ego shrinks, The throne feels smaller, the crown feels heavier, the pride feels thinner. Because ego cannot drink from silence, cannot feed on absence, cannot grow in a void. And emptiness itself becomes the weapon. The longer it stretches, the more unbearable it becomes, the more it presses down on him like weight he cannot throw off. Emptiness is not nothing. It is everything he cannot handle. It is the reminder that his power was borrowed, his strength was dependent, his pride was fragile. Because the ego is a parasite, and parasites die without a host. The most brutal truth is that emptiness does not even need to fight him. It does not attack, it does not strike, it simply denies, it simply withholds. It simply remains vacant, cold, unreachable, and the denial is enough. The refusal is enough. The vacancy is enough. Slowly, painfully, endlessly, the ego withers, it shrinks, it folds into itself. It collapses under the pressure of nothingness, because emptiness is not weakness. Emptiness is power. It is the battlefield where he cannot even stand, the silence he cannot break, the void he cannot fill. And ego cannot survive in it. It will fight, it will scream, it will claw at the walls, but there are no walls, there is nothing to hold on to, nothing to push against, nothing to grasp, and in that nothingness it dies slowly, invisibly, eternally. Fading, starving, collapsing endlessly, endlessly without end. Coldness is not just silence, not just absence, not just distance. It is a mirror, a merciless mirror held up to him when no other distractions remain, because when warmth is gone, when attention is denied, when words no longer flow, he is left alone with the only voice he cannot escape, his own. Coldness forces self-reflection because it removes the noise, it removes the shield, it removes the excuses, it removes the audience that once clapped for his pride. And in that stripping away, he is left bare, left raw, left face to face with the truth he spent so long covering. In the presence of warmth, he could hide. In the comfort of attention, he could pretend. In the echo of validation, he could inflate. But in coldness, there is nowhere to hide. The silence does not protect him, it exposes him. The distance does not free him, it traps him. The indifference does not ignore him, it reveals him. And in that revelation, his ego begins to see its cracks, its lies, its fragility. He begins to notice the hollowness in his own words, the emptiness in his own gestures, the weakness in his own strength. Because coldness, unlike anger, does not distract, it focuses, it sharpens, it magnifies everything he has avoided. Coldness forces him to ask questions he never wanted to face. Why is she no longer looking at me? Why is my voice no longer enough? Why does my presence no longer move her? Why does my pride feel smaller in her silence? And those questions are knives turned inward. They pierce not his body but his illusion. They cut not his flesh but his ego. They wound not his image in the world, but his image in himself. And those wounds bleed endlessly, because there are no words to patch them, no applause to cover them, no warmth to soothe them, only silence, only distance, only coldness, and the longer the coldness stretches, the deeper the reflection grows. He cannot escape it in the day, because her indifference lingers in every glance. He cannot escape it in the night, because her silence echoes in his thoughts. He cannot escape it in his pride, because pride starves without her acknowledgement. He cannot escape it in his excuses, because excuses collapse without someone to believe them. Coldness is the mirror he cannot shatter, the gaze he cannot turn away from, the truth he cannot silence. Coldness forces self-reflection by leaving him nowhere else to look, and the reflection is not kind, it is not flattering, it does not forgive. It shows him everything he wanted to hide, every flaw he wanted to bury, every weakness he wanted to deny. And the more he looks, the more he breaks, the more he breaks, the more he sees, the more he sees, the more he wishes to run. But there is nowhere to run, nowhere to hide, nowhere to escape, only coldness. Only silence. Only that mirror standing before him, stretching endlessly, reflecting endlessly, breaking him endlessly, forcing him endlessly, endlessly, endlessly without end. To be unseen is not the same as being absent. To be unseen is not the same as being forgotten. It is to be there, yet invisible. Exist, yet not acknowledged, to stand in the light, yet be treated like shadow, and that is a weight heavier than stone, sharper than steel, more suffocating than chains. Because the human heart, even one swollen with ego, craves to be seen, to be noticed, to be validated, to be confirmed in its existence. And when that is denied, when the gaze no longer lingers, when the eyes no longer search, when the attention no longer arrives, the unseen begins to feel like a ghost haunting its own life. He enters the room and there is no spark. He speaks and there is no response. He gestures and there is no reaction, and the silence that answers is not just silence. It is erasure, it is invisibility, it is the crushing realization that presence no longer mattered. And the weight of that invisibility grows heavier with every moment, pressing down on him like gravity he cannot escape. The louder he tries to be, the heavier it presses, the more he demands to be noticed, the deeper it suffocates him. Because to be unseen is not just to be ignored. It is to be told without words, you no longer hold value here. The psychological weight of being unseen is brutal because it attacks the very core of ego. Ego is built on recognition. Ego is built on reflection. Ego is built on proof that I matter, I am seen, I am admired, I am feared, I am noticed. But when the eyes no longer turn, when the energy no longer flows, when the recognition is stripped away, the ego finds itself drowning in its own emptiness. It panics, it thrashes, it shouts, but every movement only exposes how desperate it is for light. And the absence of light is a punishment beyond measure. To be unseen is to feel smaller every day, to shrink in silence, to become a whisper in a world that no longer listens. It is the gnawing sense that existence itself is dissolving. It is the torment of walking among others but being treated like air, and when the one gaze he craves the most refuses to acknowledge him, when the one source of warmth turns cold, when the one presence that fed his pride closes its doors, the weight becomes unbearable. It crushes him from the inside out. It bends his pride into dust. It makes every step heavier, every word hollower, every moment longer. Because the truth is, being unseen is not emptiness. It is suffocation. It is being present yet erased, alive yet dismissed, existing yet denied. And the ego, which once roared so loudly, now whispers, now cracks, now begs silently for just one glance, just one flicker, just one acknowledgement to prove it still matters. But nothing comes, no glance, no flicker, no proof, only coldness, only silence. Only the unbearable, unshakable, inescapable weight of being unseen, pressing heavier and heavier, stretching longer and longer, crushing endlessly, suffocating endlessly, breaking endlessly, endlessly, endlessly without end. Confrontation is loud, it is fire, it is storm, it is words thrown like weapons, it is voices clashing like thunder. It is a battle where both sides bleed but both sides exist, because confrontation still means recognition. It still means he matters enough to fight. It still means he is worthy of reaction. But indifference is the desert after the fire. Indifference is the silence after the storm. Indifference is not battle but burial, because in confrontation he is acknowledged. In indifference he is erased, and erasure is a wound deeper than any blade could cut. Confrontation feeds him in secret, because even when you rage, even when you argue, even when you fight, you are still giving energy, you are still giving attention, you are still proving he is part of your world. But indifference denies him all of it. Indifference starves him. Indifference tells him without words, you are nothing to me now, not love, not hate, not even memory worth holding, and that emptiness, that dismissal, that refusal is unbearable, because anger he can fight, but indifference he cannot touch, Anger he can twist into proof he matters, but indifference gives it nothing, nothing to hold, nothing to spin, nothing to twist, only silence, only emptiness. Indifference is colder than hate. Hate is fire, it burns, it consumes, but indifference is ice, it freezes, it numbs. It does not even allow him the comfort of pain born of importance, because hate says I still feel you, but indifference says I feel nothing at all. And nothingness is heavier than hatred, colder than rejection, sharper than rage, because nothingness leaves him stranded in a void he cannot escape. He would rather be hated than ignored. He would rather be fought than dismissed, because at least hatred is acknowledgement. But indifference strips even that away. And the deeper cut of indifference is that it looks effortless. It is not a war cry, it is not a slammed door, it is not an angry tear. It is calm, it is quiet, it is casual, it is the turning of the head, the steady gaze that does not pause, the silence that does not waver, the choice that does not explain. And in that calmness he realizes how powerless he is, because rage means you care, but indifference means you don't, and there is no wound sharper to the ego than realizing it no longer matters enough to inspire even hatred. Indifference breaks deeper than confrontation, because confrontation gives him something to hold on to, something to push against, something to define himself with, but indifference leaves nothing, no target. No echo, no proof, just a void stretching endlessly, swallowing him whole, breaking him without touch, suffocating him without sound, burying him without fight. And the more indifferent you remain, the deeper the cracks in his pride, the louder the silence becomes, the heavier the weight presses, the sharper the wound cuts, endlessly cutting, endlessly breaking, endlessly freezing, endlessly without end. Power is rarely taken by force, because force invites resistance, force sparks a war. Force makes noise that can be answered with noise, but silence. Silence does not fight. Silence does not shout. Silence does not demand, it waits. It withdraws, it denies. And in that denial, the balance of power shifts, slowly at first, quietly, invisibly. Until suddenly, the one who once held control finds himself weakened, starved, undone, while the one who remained silent now stands unshakable, untouched, untouchable. In the beginning, he believes silence is weakness. He mistakes it for surrender. He convinces himself he has won because there are no words against him, no anger to challenge him, no energy spent to oppose him. But he does not realize that every moment of silence is erosion, every second of quiet is a stripping away of his power. Every withheld reaction is another rope slipping from his grip. Because his power was never in himself, it was always in the response he could draw, the emotions he could trigger, the validation he could demand. Without response, without reaction, without acknowledgement, that power withers, collapses, dissolves, and the throne he thought was solid beneath him crumbles into dust. Silence transfers power like a tide moving, unseen beneath the surface. It does not crash, it does not roar, it does not announce itself, but slowly, steadily, it carries everything away from him and delivers it to you. Because the one who does not speak, the one who does not react, the one who does not rise to his bait, holds the true control. He is chained by his need for acknowledgement, and you are freed by your refusal to give it. He is desperate for a word, and you are powerful in withholding it. He is broken by absence, and you are strengthened by restraint. The shift is subtle but undeniable. Where once he stood loud and certain, now he trembles in the face of quiet. Where once he commanded attention, now he begs for it. Where once he believed he had control, now he is at the mercy of your silence. And silence does not bend. Silence does not break. Silence does not answer. It holds, it waits, it grows heavier and heavier until he realizes the truth. Power is no longer his. Silence has moved it. Silence has stolen it. Silence has carried it to the one who can remain calm, the one who can remain distant, the one who can remain indifferent. And the more silence stretches, the greater the shift becomes, the more desperate he grows, the more powerful you appear. Until the balance is not balance at all. It is collapse, it is reversal, it is domination. Because power shifts through silence, not in noise, not in confrontation, not in fire, but in stillness, in emptiness, in the refusal to give what he craves most. And that shift is unstoppable, unshakable, undeniable, stretching deeper and deeper, growing stronger and stronger, endlessly shifting, endlessly breaking, endlessly reversing, endlessly without end. Coldness is never empty, coldness is never hollow, coldness is never without meaning, because coldness itself speaks. It speaks louder than words. It speaks sharper than arguments. It speaks deeper than declarations. Coldness is the unspoken truth that cannot be denied, because when warmth is gone, when affection is withheld, when presence no longer flows toward him, the truth he has tried to ignore rises to the surface, undeniable, unescapable. Coldness does not need to explain, it does not need to justify, it does not need to argue, because its very existence is evidence, and evidence does not beg to be believed. Coldness is the truth he cannot twist, the truth he cannot bargain with, the truth he cannot shout over. Words can be denied, but silence cannot. Excuses can be built against accusations, but they collapse against indifference. He can fight noise, he can debate reasons, he can defend against anger, but what can he do when faced with coldness? Nothing. There is no weapon to fight it, no shield to block it, no strategy to undo it. Coldness is absolute. It is the mirror that reflects reality without distortion, without mercy, without disguise. And the unspoken truth inside coldness is brutal. It says, you no longer matter, your power is broken, your presence does not move me, your pride does not shake me, your noise does not touch me. Coldness delivers that message without sound, without sentence, without explanation. And the more he feels it, the more he understands, this is not accident, this is not oversight, this is not forgetfulness. It is truth, unspoken but undeniable, written in the air between you, carved in the silence that surrounds you, heavy in the absence that grows with every breath. Coldness is the verdict he cannot appeal. It is the sentence he cannot escape. It is the reality he cannot rewrite. And unlike anger, which can be mistaken for passion, unlike confrontation, which can be mistaken for care, coldness has no such mask. It does not hide its meaning. It does not soften its blow. It says everything by saying nothing. It reveals everything by withholding everything. And that revelation crushes him, because it tells him more than words ever could. Coldness is the unspoken truth that his ego cannot survive, because ego thrives on lies, on the illusion of control, on the fantasy of importance, on the myth of dominance. But coldness shatters all of it without speaking a single word. It reduces noise to silence, arrogance to emptiness, pride to dust. And in that silence, he hears what he has been running from, what he has been denying, what he has been hiding. The truth that the story is no longer his to write. And the longer the coldness holds, the louder the truth becomes, until it roars in silence, until it screams without sound, until it burns without flame. Coldness as unspoken truth is heavier than any confession, more final than any explanation, more devastating than any argument, stretching endlessly, pressing endlessly, revealing endlessly, breaking endlessly, endlessly, endlessly without. And ego is fragile though it pretends to be steel. Ego is hollow though it masquerades as stone. Ego is glass dressed in gold, glittering on the outside but brittle at its core. And when coldness, silence, indifference, and distance surround it, when every weapon of absence strikes again and again, when every unspoken truth presses deeper and deeper, there comes a moment when the ego no longer bends, no longer resists, no longer even pretends to stand. It shatters. Not with noise, not with spectacle, not with warning, but suddenly, completely, irreversibly. And that shattering is unlike any wound, because wounds can heal, cracks can mend, pride can be rebuilt, but when ego shatters, it does not return. It lies in fragments too sharp to touch, too scattered to gather, too broken to piece back together. He tries to lift it, but it cuts his hands. He tries to rebuild it, but the pieces no longer fit. He tries to pretend it still stands, but the reflection shows him only ruins. And every attempt to cover it, every attempt to mask it, every attempt to deny it only reminds him of the soundless collapse that already happened. Because ego, once shattered, does not return to its original shape. It loses its illusions, it loses its shine, it loses the lies that kept it alive. The shattering is not just loss, it is humiliation. It is the exposure of weakness he spent his life hiding. It is the collapse of control he swore was unshakable. It is the death of the image he worshipped more than truth. And humiliation is a wound deeper than pain, sharper than anger, heavier than grief, because humiliation does not just hurt in the moment. It lingers, it haunts, it follows, it whispers in every silence. You were broken, you were nothing, you were never what you thought you were. And the ego, once shattered, tries to find blame. It searches for excuses, it clings to shadows, but the silence allows no excuses, the coldness allows no blame, the indifference allows no comfort. The truth is laid bare. It broke not because of others, but because it was always fragile, always hollow, always unsteady. The shattering only revealed what was already there, and from that moment forward, nothing is the same. His pride does not return, his arrogance does not glow, his presence does not command, because the fragments cut him every time he tries to pick them up, and so he stops trying. He accepts in silence that the image he worshipped is gone, and what remains is weakness he cannot admit, emptiness he cannot escape, hollowness he cannot hide. Ego shattered beyond repair is not noise, it is not explosion, it is not fire. It is silence, it is fragments, it is dust scattered across the floor of his own pride, never to be rebuilt, never to be restored, never to be whole again. And that brokenness stretches on, deeper than words, sharper than memory, heavier than time, breaking endlessly, haunting endlessly, echoing endlessly, endlessly, endlessly without end. And so, in the end, there is nothing left to fight, nothing left to prove, nothing left to save. The noise has fallen silent, the pride has turned to dust, the throne he once stood upon has crumbled into fragments that no hand can gather. What remains is only silence, gold, unshakable, eternal silence. A silence that no words can break, a silence that no pleading can soften, a silence that does not bend, does not forgive, does not forget. This is how ego dies, not in fire, not in battle, not in rage, but in the quiet weight of indifference, in the cold refusal of recognition, in the unspoken truth that it no longer matters. And once shattered, it is gone forever. He will search for it in echoes, he will chase it in shadows, he will beg for it in silence, but he will never find it again. Because the greatest power is not in anger, not in confrontation, not in war. It is in the coldness that needs no words, the silence that cannot be broken, the distance that cannot be crossed. That is where his ego ended, that is where his power died, that is where the story closed. Not with a roar, but with an emptiness so complete that nothing more could ever grow within it. And in that emptiness he remains, silent, broken, unseen, forever.